A relationship is two-way. If it's not a two-way relationship you're having with, it's not working, you got to know when to cut ties. And I really kind of fell in love with this whole idea of connected technologies, specifically connected home, was something I just fell in love with. So I built one of the first IP-based home automation systems in the world. And we sold that several years later to Motorola. When you bring somebody in, especially at a co-founder level, you're essentially marrying that person from a business perspective. So it's a really important that you actually have the right vibe, that you actually have the right chemistry to be able to work together. But the fact that they're making massive profits from it, trillions of dollars moving back and forth in a world called advertising. That was your data, your information, and you're not getting any of that revenue. The worst part is they tell you your data doesn't have value.
Hello guys, welcome back to the Intellect Podcast, episode 13. Today I have the pleasure of introducing you guys Jim Hunter, founder, speaker, entrepreneur, and so many other titles that we can speak more over in the podcast.
Thank you, Sebastian. Thanks for this opportunity to share my story with folks. I really appreciate you guys coming out to Brooklyn for this, what's going to be an adventure.
Yeah, awesome. So if you can introduce yourself, in a couple of words to the audience seeing us, how would you introduce yourself?
A couple of words. I think the biggest way I would introduce myself is I'm a creator. I'm creative with regards to writing, building companies. I think I tend to try to think differently, like Apple tells us to do.
Exactly. So let's go, I know you have built many companies, you have exited successfully. I think it's two companies.
Two companies.
It might be more.
Not two companies I've actually exited.
So obviously, let's go all the way back to the beginning of your journey. So where did you grow up, Jim?
So I grew up in the state of Arkansas here in the United States, which is a southern state. And I was there until it was time to move on. And at that point, I joined the military. So I became a nuclear engineer in the military. I went through a rigorous training program and became certified to operate nuclear reactors. I became certified to teach people how to operate nuclear reactors. And I did that for about 8 years until I got out of the military. But while I was in, I started creating my first company. And we sold that several years later to Motorola.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So tell me, what was the reason behind you joining the Army? Was it something?
Navy.
The Navy?
Yeah.
Yeah, what was the reason behind joining the Navy for you? Was it something, that it was there from the family or?
It's a great question. My dad was in the Air Force. I don't think that was a driving factor. University didn't really work well for me. My computer background didn't serve me well. I got kicked out for hacking. So I had to find something else to do. And I was doing all these, I was a disc jockey. I had all these odd jobs trying to figure out where I kind of fit in. And I had just gone through a breakup. So there's some emotional things tied to that. So I joined the military. And it turned out to be one of the best decisions I made. Simply because it forced me to grow up. It forced me to kind of acknowledge who I was and what my capabilities were. And then once I started to kind of engage and really learn about that, it brought me out of my shell. I was a very introverted person when I was younger. I guess shy would be the word that you would use. And then once I kind of got past that, that's when I was like, oh, I can build this, I can make this happen. And I really kind of fell in love with this whole idea of connected technologies, specifically connected home was something I just fell in love with. So I built one of the first IP-based home automation systems in the world, meaning it's connected over networks.
Oh, wow. Well, first of all, so you hacked your school, university, and then you got kicked out of.
You're going to dwell on that, aren't you?
Yeah, so can you tell me a bit more about that story?
Well, sometimes when you go to a new place like that and you're away from home, you're in a new environment, you kind of connect with maybe the wrong people.
Yeah.
So I connected with some wrong people. And they like to cause problems, and I fell in with them, and I'm not sure I want this on the podcast. We'll leave it at that.
Okay, interesting. So you joined the Navy, and then in the Navy is that, how did you start, creating your own venture? Was it something that, came out of nowhere? How did you get into entrepreneurship at the Navy?
It's a great question. I think that one of the things is I already had a computer background. And when I was in the military for the longest time, I kind of purposely didn't have a computer because I didn't want to revisit old wounds. So at the point that I was transferred down to Virginia, which was I was in for, it's probably about my 5.5 year mark, I said, okay, I'm going to start exploring computers again. And I took some courses. I was taking some advanced math courses and things like that at the community college. And one of my instructors had this tape on something called Smart Home, Smart House specifically. And I just fell in love with the whole idea, the Jetsons idea, all of this ability to kind of control things. And I dove in head first. I was, because I was an instructor, because I was actually working on the USS Enterprise in Virginia, which was in dry dock, which means that we weren't going anywhere. I really started to commit a lot of time to start to build software, start self-taught some programming languages, started to build product, and then kind of connected to the right people who were making the hardware and the devices that could be connected. So I really met some good people along the way, and by the time I got out of the military, I was showing at trade shows. I had a product, a software product that fit on those 5 little mini discs.
Yeah.
So I was shipping that out to people, drinking lots of Mountain Dew. People would ship me Mountain Dew so that I could put features into product, right?
Yeah.
That was, who knows what that effect that's going to have in the long run. But yeah, that's how I kind of started building my first company. And then I partnered with the guy that was at Microsoft. He was hired to do a review of the product, wanted to join, so we formed a company. We merged with another company, and I moved up to Redmond, Washington, and I was up there for 4 years, working with building that company up. And that was the first one that we built.
Wow. So, well, it is incredible. Like, obviously, someone being in the Navy for so long and then making that transition to like the normal life. Was there like any reason why you made that transition? It was the main reason because you knew you wanted to build a company, or?
I think that I knew there was more.
Yeah.
I was in the nuclear power program, and the future of nuclear power, because of political landscape at the time, was in question. Yeah. And I was like, I don't necessarily want to work in this field. I'd like to do something bigger. So that's when I started to say, I can write my own software. I can build my own product. So that's where I went.
Okay, interesting. And when it comes to your first partner, I think something that many entrepreneurs, young people like myself, one of the most important decisions we make when we embark into any venture is picking the right co-founder.
Oh, absolutely.
So what made you pick that partner at that time? Was it because of his background in Microsoft? What was the reason, the characteristics that made you make that decision of like, okay, this is the person I want to start a company with?
He was a solid, he's a good guy, and there was just a good vibe, right? I think that a lot in life kind of revolves around frequencies, how we exist in different frequencies depending on what our likes and our dislikes and all these things are. And I think he kind of matched my frequency at the time. So it was a natural, like, no-brainer to say, yeah, let's do this together, let's move this forward. And then we started bringing we brought another partner in to handle some pieces we couldn't handle. And then we ended up merging with another company, which made the company grow even more. So I think that, yeah, you're absolutely right. When you find a partner in a company, when you bring somebody in, especially at a co-founder level, that's a big decision because you're essentially marrying that person from a business perspective. So it's a really important that you actually have the right vibe, that you actually have the right chemistry to be able to work together.
And no, yeah, definitely. And when it comes to, do you ever have like a negative experience when picking a business partner, or do you have like any encounter like where it didn't work out? Because I know many of my entrepreneur friends, even myself, maybe at the beginning, before Intelix, we picked out the wrong partner, and that led to chaos in the business, or it just didn't work out well. So did you ever face in your career something similar to that?
I wouldn't say at a founder level or a co-founder level, but certainly you bring people in for important jobs and maybe the personalities just don't fit, especially when you get past that interview process.
Yeah.
In my second company, we had a challenge where we got funded, but the funding partner insisted that we bring in their chosen CEO to run things. And I had some challenges with that because this was my baby this time, and I was okay, let's get into this. And he came in and tried to change everything. It turns out that we end up having to have a coup to stay alive. And we did. And we ended up selling that company to Motorola Mobility a few years later. But he was sending out notes to employees saying, we're not going to get a paycheck, so you guys should go find another job. And with that, we went back to the board and said, listen, this isn't working out. Let's make this work the right way. And they were in full agreement. They went with us to a partner site. They sat and listened to them say, yeah, we've got a deal here. We're going to move forward. And they then forced him out.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow, super interesting.
Yeah, it's a rare one to be able to have a coup against your CEO, get the board to approve it, even though the board appointed him, and move on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and when it comes to obviously, kind of like going a bit, not too much into your journey, but in situations like this, I think one of the pillars of being a founder is being able to handle stress. So you, Jim Hunter, what is your secret to handling stress? Is it something that just came to be like just from experience and learning?
Okay, so that's a great question because some people handle it in different ways. For me, I think the most important thing is just while you recognize that the target is still the target, where you want to go is still where you want to go. You've got to be aware that the path to get there is not going to be what you, and in 0% of the cases, does it go when you say, I'm going to start a company, I'm going to get to here, and here's exactly how I'm going to go? That's not the way it lays out. So you have to first make sure that you're flexible enough to say, yeah, I got to take a left instead of the right that I had planned. Because everything is a circuitous path that you do not have necessarily control over. And that's it. Recognizing that you don't have control over the path that takes you to your success, but you still know where you're going. Wow. I think that's an important piece to recognize. And that's sometimes giving up a lot. When you think about that, it's like, well, I know the journey. I know what it's going to be. You really don't. When I talk to my developing teams, I say, how you should think about things? Go north. I'm sorry. Go west. North is a different conversation altogether. Go west. And what I say by go west is as you travel, you can see further past the horizon. You don't know what the challenge is. You don't know that there's a mountain in front of you, so you're going to have to go around it. You don't know that there's a mountain in front of you, so you're going to have to learn to climb it. You don't learn that until you see the mountain, until you actually take on that task. And then the next time you see another mountain, you may be able to employ those skills, but there may be something different about that particular obstacle. So the biggest thing is just do it. Just move forward. And I specifically pick west is because that is the way that we kind of, as this, as a species, just kind of move with the sun kind of following us along. So the light will shine and we'll be able to move. And when we cross a river, we'll know how to cross more rivers. When we get past the next horizon, then the next and the next, we'll keep seeing every day these new things. And I think that's the biggest opportunity that helps to settle the mind, is to recognize that tomorrow is a brand new day. And as long as we continue to go west, we can continue to solve the problems that are ahead of us.
No, yeah, definitely. No, and I love how you were saying about when you see a new mountain again, and it's just all about building those skill sets.
Yeah.
That's something, once you build the skill sets, you have it forever with you. And I think that's worth more than anything. And I think like having those skill sets is, even if the business goes good or bad, the most important thing is those skill sets.
And they're reusable. It's a toolbox. You're building a toolbox that translates. You may be in a company that you think, this is my job, this is what I'm going to be doing forever, but the skills that you're learning while you're doing that tend to translate really well across other types of industries. One of the most powerful is the ability to communicate with people. Yeah. Once you can learn how to communicate with people, it doesn't matter what the job is. Once you can understand how to find ways to work with teams, it doesn't matter what the job is, right? So I think that those are the big skills, that interpersonal skills that really drive success for you as an individual. So don't stay behind that desk. Get out there. When I sold my second company, I sold it into Motorola, that sold into Google, Motorola Mobility, that sold into Google. And Google brought in a CEO and a CTO to kind of help through the transition. And I remember going to some trade shows, going out to Barcelona, going out to Amsterdam, and then here in the U.S. And that CEO and that CTO became close. The CTO and I became good friends, and the CEO would walk with me in the trade show floor, and they would bring me into meetings, because the importance of knowing what goes on behind those doors, having a seat at the table. If you have an opportunity as an individual to get the right ear to hear you and to be able to get in and just sit in the table, he's an observer who's sitting out back against the window on the bench. That gives you more knowledge than you would have when you're outside of that room. And I think that that's the other is find a way to get a seat at the table, even if it's by the window where you're observing.
Wow. No, I think that's that's awesome. That's awesome. I think that's a great perspective to have. And obviously, if you are in a room with everybody, it's just, great people, founders, speakers, and even if you don't have a business, as long as you are there and you can hear them and hear their conversations, you learn so much.
Absolutely. And not only that, you also demystify some of it, because when you don't know what's there, I think your mind might tend to build it up to be more than it is. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who it is, they're all a human being. They all have wants, they have desires, they have needs, they have concerns, they have fears, they have hopes and dreams, they have children. All of this is a commonality that when we learn to actually really communicate with people, I think that's what really enables you to actually grow not only your network, but to grow internally as well.
Wow. So now, going back into your businesses, so you have done 2 exits. So can you tell me a bit more about that process of exiting a company? Because not many people
That's where stress comes.
have the privilege of, doing that accomplishment. So yeah.
Well, the biggest is you just have to have a great team. You have to, okay, one of the biggest and then most important things I learned in both of those companies to exit the company is learned retroactively. And that is, man, we should have done that the right way with the bookkeeping. We should have done this the right way with these filings. And the paperwork is everything. If someone's going to buy you, they want your house to be in order. So you need to make sure that from the very beginning, all of your accounting is good and right. Make sure all of the contracts that you have are readily available. Make sure you are organized and ready when that happens. There's a lot of work to do to make that happen. And there's law firms that can actually help you do that, accounting firms that can help you do that. But if you start from the beginning and you start in a very fastidious way where you're really just kind of going to do this the right way and this the right way and this is the right way, then you tend to have less work on the other side. Now, that's easy to say, very hard to do.
Yeah, obviously, keeping your books clean. I think that's something that one of my mentors is on the process of exiting his company.
Yeah.
He told me they went all the way back.
You have to.
Like anything, even buying gifts for his employees.
Exactly.
So that's incredible. And in regards to more like the process, so were you guys approached by a VC, a equity, or this company? How is that process of did they came to you, or did you went out your way and look for them? Like, how did this occur?
Let's talk about the second one. In the second company, it was, again, it's about the team that you have with you. And I had just an amazing team. I was a CTO, but really my CEO, my COO, those guys were definitely spending the late nights. My COO had actually gotten LASIK surgery during the process. Yeah. So he was barely able to see while we're working all the numbers. We're there late at night doing all the numbers, and then these guys they're doing all the magic. But the way it all happened is because you find somebody as a company and as a business that just kind of aligns to what you're doing. And that takes meetings, lots and lots of meetings. There's also the idea that I'm going to go out and do, let me give you an example of how to do it right and how not to do it right. I can't overemphasize the importance of intellectual property. Patents, connecting and controlling your own destiny by protecting things that are unique and innovative for what you're doing. Because if you have a conversation with somebody and you do not have that IP protected, that is something that they can just run with. You have to make sure you protect that. You also need to think about the company that you keep, the companies that you're talking to, the people that you're engaging with, and just kind of do a check, a sanity check on how much you're willing to invest in that conversation, in that relationship, before you're going to have to cut ties and move on. Because everything you do from a time perspective, from a resource perspective, it's all an investment. Well, it may not be dollars, and it very well could be if you were like we were traveling halfway around the world to meet with companies. And as we were talking to companies, they were big companies, and what they were telling us was amazing. And it was a brain drain. They were learning a lot of things from us. And it was something that we thought that we had a great conversation. But the problem with big companies reorg every year. So the person that you had the greatest contact with is no longer in that position. So you have to understand that you can't just rely on a single person, and you can't rely on the ones that draw it out are the ones that are less likely to work the way you want. So when we connected with Motorola Mobility and we started talking to those guys, we had a very clear value proposition, and it was a pretty quick kind of back and forth courting. It took some time, but once we kind of got into gear, it moved in the right direction. But we also spent time with other big companies and lots of travel, and that didn't work out so well. So it really is about kind of retroactively looking back and saying, oh, yeah, let's not do that again. And again, it's in your toolbox. Learn not to do that. Look for the signs. I'm spending a lot of resources here. I'm not getting a lot of return. I can't do this forever. So where do you get to the point where you're just taking, you're not giving anything? This isn't like we said before, it's when you find a founder, when you do a company, that's a relationship piece that you're building. A relationship is two-way. If it's not a two-way relationship you're having with even a company that you're looking at and saying, well, maybe we may be valuable to you for acquisition, if it's not working, you got to know when to cut ties.
Wow, interesting. And like I think obviously this you learn a lot from like this entire process, but was that the end goal of these companies that you guys were building? Were you guys building with the mentality like, okay, we want to exit this business, or like was that on the plan?
As soon as you bring in investors, your end goal. So there's an end goal of what you want to build, and then there's an end goal of where you want to land. And as soon as you bring in investors, you need to recognize that your end goal of what you want to build may or may not be a determining factor for them. They want to make a profit. So when you run into that, when you have that situation, when you raise investors, then you have to understand that that particular goal has to shift, because every one of them wants an exit. Every one of them wants to see something that starts to generate. Now, an exit is an IPO, right? So that's also considered a way to kind of enable them to recoup their investment. But just building a company and a product and sitting on it and not providing any kind of wealth for them, any kind of liquidity for them to cash out, that's where you're going to run into problems. So if you are raising funds, you have to be in a mindset that at some point you're going to have to exit, because that's the value proposition of why they're coming in the first place.
Wow. I think this is super interesting. I'm recently getting into the startup world. Like our company was bootstrapped, but then I had to learn all about startups, raising money. So then, this is great. Even for me, just being in the podcast, I'm learning a lot. But going back to your journey, so can you tell me about, you start your company, obviously you exit, then you exit your second one. After that, do you ever take time off, or you just kept going, doing like, tell me a bit about your timeline till you get to your current company.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay, so when I sold the second to Motorola, I decided to stick around. I became a fellow at Motorola, and then I was into Google for a little while. But Google bought that company because of the patents. It was a very large, multi-billion-dollar purchase, but it was a massive patent portfolio that they really wanted out of the whole thing. So what do you do when you buy a company and it doesn't have things that you actually want? You start breaking it apart. You start piecemealing it out. And my division was ultimately sold off to a set-top box company. And I was like, that's not exactly where I want to go. And I had a conversation with the CTO of the acquiring company, and they didn't have the same vision I had. So I said, okay, I'm moving on. So when I left, I tried to do a couple of things. I enjoyed some of the benefits of what I had accomplished. But some of my colleagues that were with me at the company, the second company that was acquired was called For Home. And some of my colleagues at For Home had gone on and done other things. And one of them had landed down in Southern California and building a great technology that's still around today. And he was the CTO of that company. And he reached out to me after a consumer electronics show and said, listen, can you help us solve this problem of how to translate what we're building into something people can understand? And specifically because they were working with major carriers, operators like Verizon, AT&T, companies like that. So I put a plan together. I showed them how they could talk about it like building blocks, and specifically created an entire Lego kind of view of how these things plugged in and out, all 3D kind of visualizations and everything like that. Even created the Legos themselves, purchased all them off eBay to create exactly what we're looking for. And I ended up landing there as the chief scientist and the chief architect, or chief evangelist rather. And as the chief scientist, then it was my job to help further that mission. So for 4 years, I built and ran all of the trade shows for them. We had amazing trade shows where you would walk in. We had a big quarter of a ballroom at Consumer Electronics Show in the Venetian. And you would walk into one of our demonstration rooms, and we were early on with Alexa and doing things like that. So we would say, you know, Alexa, welcome our guests from name your company, and the whole every screen would change to branding for that company. The colors in the room would shift. Everything was kind of became about that company because we wanted to feel like they were at home, right? So everything, which is kind of weird because you walk in and you say, welcome Verizon, and everything turns red. But that company, I was there for 4 years, and it was really a fun time. We built some really great products. But I got to a point where I knew there was something more that I could do. And it was great working with with good friends. We just had a great time down there. And then I got an offer to come out in New York. An amazing offer for a company called Delos that was actually using technology to help people be well inside of buildings. And they are the worldwide leader of wellness indoors. They have wellness certifications across, I think it's 134 countries. I don't know what the numbers are today. 6.25 billion square feet of real estate to make sure that seal that shows that you know you're well certified says that building was built with people in mind. It's not just about, you know, the building a building and then not thinking about the lighting, not thinking about the layouts, not thinking about the air quality. All of that comes in consideration. So I was like, that's an amazing offer. So I went out and I became CTO of this $1 billion company in Manhattan for 5 years. And I left at the end of September of last year and started this.
And what was the reason?
My journey.
What was the reason behind leaving this company and, you know, going again into the entrepreneur journey?
Well, there's an itch that comes, but at the same time, I think that just, you know, when ChatGPT hit the scene, right, and you started seeing what was possible, I looked back at an idea that I'd had 10 years prior. And I had branded it and put everything together and called it nCent. And it was too early. I did this while I was at Motorola. And I even showed it to some of the bosses at Motorola. And they're like, there's not enough data for this to be valuable. And I said, yeah, you're right. We're too early for it. And I started looking at what AI could do. I started looking at how connected people were. And I said, this is an opportunity that it's just too big. And I said, it's time to try it. And AI was going to be is crucial to how we actually solve a lot of these big problems.
Wow.
So that's what was the trigger for me to leave and start to look at the case study, start to do some research projects, hire people to do some research projects, and look at what the space looks like around something I did not know, which is marketing, advertising, how brands find consumers, all of that kind of customer acquisition model. Yeah. And so I did a lot of research there. And I started to, as I do, say, okay, this is different. What we're doing is different, and there's some opportunities that are lining up, making it kind of a perfect storm if we move forward and do this. So I started to file patents, as I do, provisional patents, but still protecting the IP, as I was mentioning before.
So that's the most important, the IP.
Yeah, the IP is really important because And it depends. There's terminology that people use when you think about a patent, and there's sword and shield.
Yeah.
I use it as a shield mostly. That means that if somebody comes at you, then you've got something. Nope. This is what I've got that you're doing, so you can help protect yourself. You go on the defensive, but you don't have to actually crumble to them because they may have something that's crossing over in your boundary.
Yeah.
Sword is people that, and there's some really bad ones out there. They'll just they're called patent trolls. They'll buy patent portfolios and then go and sue everybody who's violating those patents because they can make money on doing that.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Business organizations can do that.
Absolutely. When a company goes belly up, they still have patents. Those patents are valuable, especially at a discount, to companies that just kind of bring all these together and then aggressively go after people who already have product in the field that happens to be violating those patents.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow, interesting. So, 10 years, it was kind of like from when you had the idea and now you saw the AI and you were like, okay, now is the right time to go and do this business. So obviously, you have done a couple of businesses. You said that one of the first things you did was research. And when it came to acquiring your team, I think that's something, I met one of your partners.
Yeah.
So how do you went from that? You started meeting people. How were you able to acquire new partners for this new venture?
I think the biggest is you kind of start to reflect back on people that impressed you along your journey. One of the things I've actually talked to people about before is there's the idea of bringing somebody in, and then there's the idea of a certain type of a person that you don't know where they fit to solve a problem, but you want them involved. And maybe not now, but in the future, so you kind of always keep them back in your mind. Kind of like if you're casting a movie.
Yeah.
When you're casting a movie and you're writing it and you're the person that's actually, because I write as well, and when I write, you think about who's going to play that role, who's going to do that. And it may not be because somebody's qualified to do that. You may have a role that's actually for a guy that's completely muscle bound, but there's this one actor that doesn't have muscles that you really liked when you saw him. And it's like, man, he's got the personality for it. How can we solve this? Well, let's give it some time and see where it goes, right?
Where it fits in.
Where it fits in.
Yeah.
So I think that one of the things as you go through your life's journey, as your career, just remember those people. Remember the people that make just an indelible impression. They're just like, I'm going to find a way to work with you in some way in the future, because I think that the universe kind of tends to give us these signs. And when you connect with somebody, and I talked about it earlier, kind of at the same frequency, when somebody kind of vibing in the same way, you're like, I want to do something with this person. They're really kind of impressive. And that's the first thing, is I kind of remembered a couple of people that were like that I kind of brought back in.
Yeah.
At the same time, you also have to go and find talent that can do some interesting things. So my guy, Ross, who's the head of AI, I met him at one of Andrew Young's rooftop parties here in Brooklyn, which was amazing because we started talking, and originally he dinged my user experience on my mobile phone for what we were showing as a demonstration. But it turns out, as we started to hang out, he's like, he's an AI guy. That's exactly what he does. But he's like one of those polyglots that also knows user experience, that also knows all these other things. Brilliant guy. And that was like a natural to kind of, okay, let's bring him in and do that. And sometimes that starts with a contract. In fact, when I went back to the company that I was at Irvine in Southern California, my first intro in there when my old colleague, who was the CTO of that company, brought me in, was a contract, right? So it starts with something that, you're going to have some sort of exchange for goods and services, but it grows really quickly when you start working together.
Wow.
Because you got to have that right chemistry. So everybody who comes on, that's also important. So when you set up a startup, you have to think about the fact that I could be right and I could be wrong about this person. So when you start to allot cap tables and ownership in the company, that's what the vesting schedule's for. That's what all of the pieces around how much and when they're going to actually obtain ownership of the company of your baby. So
wow.
I think that's important too.
No, I think that's actually great point. I think having a contract in place and then maybe having some, if you, let's say, double the revenue, just to give example, in the next 2-3 years, you get part of the ownership. And that's something, I have been seeing a lot with a lot of my friends, even myself at my company, when I want to give ownership to, people that are joining in. And I see a lot of potential is, putting those things in place because, like you said,
Yeah, you've got to put some restrictions around it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're not valuing your own company. Yeah. If it's a piece of what it is that you're creating and you're willing to give it away for somebody just because and not vet it, then you're devaluing what you're creating yourself. Yeah. So you have to, it's kind of like in any kind of relationship, you're not going to be able to really love somebody else unless you love yourself. You have to love your company before you can actually really, enable others to be part of that in the way that makes you comfortable.
Yeah, well, you have to love yourself to love others. I love that quote.
Yeah, yeah.
So now, for the people watching the podcast, can you go more in depth about your company, where, what you guys are doing in nCent, and just go more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the company is called nCent. It's nCent. You can find us at ncent.me. We have a website that needs to be updated, as websites do. But what we're trying to do is really fix something that my generation broke. And that is the idea that we can take your data when you check a box and do anything we want with it. That's how that initial relationship when you started browsing to websites that brought service started. Except there was nothing in the agreement that says there's a point at which that will stop. So if you're watching this right now and you want to see how bad that's gotten over the time, let's say just of Instagram or Facebook or any of these sites, think of an app. Go to the App Store, Android or iOS, and when you look at just that store for that particular app, scroll down. We call it below the fold. And they have to show you, because of privacy laws, what exactly they're taking from you. Oh, wait. Okay. If you see all that data, everything that's there, that wasn't there to begin with. As more and more data became available, they took more and more and more and more. The idea of doing that is bad enough. I call that checkbox piracy. You check a box, they take it. But the fact that they're making massive profits from it, trillion-dollar companies built because of this, trillions of dollars moving back and forth in a world called advertising, that was your data, your information, and you're not getting any of that revenue. The worst part is they tell you your data doesn't have value. That's called gaslighting. So we think that that is wrong. And the world actually agrees with that because privacy law changes are empowering end consumers. Privacy law changes are enabling people to say, you can't sell my data anymore. Right behind that are data ownership laws. Data ownership laws are doing the same thing. It's about empowering the consumer. So we think that the opportunity here is to flip the script. Change advertising into a C2B model, where the consumer has the value propositions of their data that they can sell to brands who have products that they want. So with nCent, that's exactly what we do. We look and we say the biggest breakdown of everything here is, where do they reach you? When you're reaching out to, when a brand reaches out to you, how do they contact you?
Email.
Or phone or anything else.
Yeah.
And that blows up in the weekend, it blows up all the time, and you got to sit through it, and it's a lot of noise. We think that's the problem. Your identity should not be for sale. Your identity is the piece that we do not bring into the equation. So on our platform, you can remain anonymous. We never, ever know who you are. Mainly because what we're trying to build is a relationship of trust. And what's less trustworthy than losing a bunch of identified data about you? Lots of companies did that. That's the reason, one of the reasons that these privacy laws exist in the first place. But the opportunity now is to really turn this into something different. So if you're anonymous and you have all of these services and all these devices that are measuring you, do you run, do you work out, how do you sleep, how do you spend, how do you shop, what's your health, what's your spending, what's your browsing, what's your media consumption? All of that de-identified data is hugely valuable when it's timely. So imagine the value that would have to a brand if they knew that yesterday you went for a run and today you're browsing for shoes. How much value would they find in that? And it's not about extracting more from the brands. It's about creating a better relationship between a brand and a consumer by allowing them to come directly to the source. So in our platform, we have consumers that are anonymous. The consumers share all the data sources they want to share. We then find the insights in that data. The fact that you ran yesterday, the way you find that is you sift through a whole bunch of data. The fact that you ran yesterday and you're browsing for shoes, those are two pieces of data that come together to form something valuable. So when you're browsing and you land on a partner website, they have the option to buy that through our system. Or when they want to find an audience of people who ran within the last week and are shopping for shoes, those are new kind of demographics because of the data. So that richer data set is going to bring a new generation of demographics, the word that we use to kind of identify what people are doing in their pieces. That we think it's the insight economy. And this insight economy is about empowering the consumer, not only by giving them part of the revenue. We share 50-50 with consumers whenever they sell their insights. Whenever an insight can be a form of a question, the brands can ask questions to them, all through our app. Never email, because we don't know the email. Never through text. You don't get blown up there. It's just through the app. As well, they can also make you offers. And that's the beauty of this whole thing. But it doesn't stop there, right? I talked about consumer acquisition. I talked about marketing and branding. But let's think about a relationship that's much more symbiotic. The other relationship that exists today between a brand and a consumer starts off very adversarial. I'm going to buy your data from somebody who took it because you checked a box and moved some money around, but you're not going to get any of it. In this case, yes, I paid for the insights from you. I'm subscribing to the insights from you. And if I can subscribe to an insight from you, then I can see the change that a product you bought from me might have on the insight that caused me to want to sell this product to you in the first place. So imagine that we do this, where you go and say, oh yeah, I see you ran yesterday, you were shopping for shoes, here's a shoe, we're gonna give you a discount on this shoe. They can say, I'm subscribing to it. So within 30 days, if a goal is not met, let's say they ask you, because they can ask you a question. You wanna run further? You wanna run faster? That brand's gonna subscribe to the inside of what you answer there. I wanna run further. Okay, if your distance doesn't go up within 30 days, then the brand will get a notification from our system saying you have a support challenge. They didn't hit their goal with the product that you got them. Let's go into support mode. What can we do? How can we fix this? How can we make this better for you? And if it does go within 30 days and you do go faster or further, we're a team. We did this together. Fantastic. What can we do for you next? Let's create these relationships, because the marker that is considered success in the industry is it the lifetime value you get from your customer relationship, the things that they actually spend and buy from you, is more than 3 times what they paid to find you in the first place. Then that's considered success. And when we say pay, that's the advertising that's getting paid. All that money kind of breaks out, and on average, across the whole e-commerce industry is about $78 per person to find a customer for a brand. You go into the higher levels, you go into exotic cars, you go into perfumes and jewelry, that can go into thousands. But that whole opportunity to create a better lifetime value, because you have, as I said, a symbiotic relationship. They want to find more about you, they buy that from you. You don't want to share it, sell it, you don't sell it, you control it. This is, I think, how it should have been to begin with, but this is the opportunity.
And I think what I think is great for, especially people like, clients and companies that want to get the data, is that they can track it. And that's something before they couldn't.
Right. And track it without having to know who you are. Without invading your privacy.
Awesome. Talking about data, something that perhaps is the only thing I remember from my cybersecurity class was about the Cambridge Analytica. So can you tell me first, for the people out there, can you tell what was the incident, why it was so important, and then maybe how your company can solve this, or is a solution for things like this?
Well, the Cambridge Analytica challenge, which was because of the Facebook API, was how data was being used, how it was being abstracted, and how people could be targeted, in this case for political reasons. But and the reason it came to bear is because you had a couple of whistleblowers that kind of threw the flag and said, this is not right, we've got to do things differently. I wouldn't say that's what's responsible for the whole privacy movement. I think that that is an add-on to the entire thing. But I think that when you look at the privacy movement, I think that came, especially GDPR started, the General Data Protection Regulation out of the European Union, started because a lot of companies were losing. There was a period of time that we had, and it started about 10 years ago, where every day there was a breach. Every day there was a credit card company. Everybody's losing your data, all of your crucial data. And it was happening on a daily basis. And I think that the initial movement there, and I could be wrong about this, but this is how I perceive this, is because companies weren't being responsible with something they didn't own.
Yeah.
They're just a steward to that information. And they were being very poor stewards. So one of the first things that GDPR established was the idea that if you lose people's data, you've got 72 hours to notify them, right? So they can do things about it. If you have people that want to be forgotten, you can't have my data anymore because you're not being a good steward, you have to comply, right? So I think that was a big piece of that. I'm not really leaning heavy into this Cambridge Analytica, but moreover, the real driving force behind this, which is the ability to put some sort of checks in place for companies that have a very valuable, regardless of what they'll tell you, resource, which is people's identity and data about them. And it's not the same level of data that I'm talking about, right? Because we don't have that same relationship with the consumers. Yeah. I think when we shift that relationship and we change this, I think that people can, their insights can be a new form of currency in the future.
No, yeah, definitely. I think like data is one of the most important things.
Yeah, but and responsibility.
Yeah,
it's like the quote from Spider-Man: "With great power comes great responsibility." And there's a lot of companies that didn't recognize either A, that the power wasn't being used responsibly, or that they needed to be responsible at all. And that's what this helped change.
And when it comes to the current company, what are the next steps that you are taking? What what's the current stage of the company, and what you're looking ahead in the future?
Great question. So we are pre-launch. We are raising a 1.5 million pre-seed just to get us through our trials, but we're lining up for trials. We're finishing up the AI implementation on our platform and hoping to get into trials by the end of this year. And those trials basically signing up certain key brands or brand agencies to say, yep, we'll buy some insights from the folks and start getting people into the platform. So as we do this is not a single company saying, oh, we want these people, we want them. This is an ecosystem. Yeah. So as an example, one of the ways that you want to help solve this problem is you want to bring people in that are valuable to the system. When you look at a marketplace, which essentially is what this is, there's two sides of it. You have consumers and you have brands, people who are going to pay for the data and get value from it, and people who are going to get paid for it and be able to empower these brands to actually have better relationships with them. This is a chicken egg situation. How do you get the consumers without the brands? How do you get the brands without the consumers? Well, you involve an ecosystem. So we're specifically looking at the first party companies. Any of these companies, I've mentioned the wearables, I mentioned the workout device, I work in the sleep, and all of these companies are in a situation because of privacy changes where they can't sell data. They're called first parties. We have a program called First to Zero. And with First to Zero, we have a revenue share and an insight share with companies that bring their customers to us every time their data. So if you're a company that makes a workout device, and that workout device is one of the ways data comes into our system, every time data from that workout device is measured through the system and sold into one of these insights, then we're going to share the revenue from that, from our side of it, with those first parties. We're also going to share insights, generalized, not identified, across those consumers, because again, we get consumers that link in, we don't know who they are. So there's no identification. We can't give that to them even if they wanted it. So when we give them, say, okay, this is how your consumers are sleeping after they're doing your workout. Yeah. This is actually what they're spending. This is how they're entertaining themselves. This kind of data is important for them to understand who their potential partners might be and other ways they could actually, find associations where customers and consumers might find it interesting.
Wow, interesting. And you already have, go through the process of raising funds and everything. If you can give one advice to any, first-time founder that is doing a pre-seed, what will it be?
You need to have, okay, there's several pieces. What's the pain point that you're solving? If you're not solving a problem, then you're not going to raise funds. How clearly can you tell that story? And you need to boil it down. Like, for example, if you're in the NVIDIA, has all these companies now are putting these programs together to give you discounts and all that kind of stuff. NVIDIA has a program called the Inception program. If you're in the NVIDIA Inception program, your pitch deck has to be 9 slides or less, right? You start to look and say you have to be able to concisely tell a lot of things in 9 slides, and that includes the first and the last slide. So you have to have a tight story. The second is you have to really be passionate about what you're doing. You have to believe it and it has to come through in everything that you're doing, and you have to be persistent. It's not going to come unless you keep going. It takes a lot to get one company to kind of buy in. And then once you get one company, then you get the next and the next, kind of like dominoes. But it takes a lot to get that first one in.
Yeah. Yeah, no, once you get the first one, then and it's the same, even with, if you start a business, the most hard part is finding the first client. Once you get the first client and you have the case study, then you can...
Exactly.
Then you can, it's easier to approach.
Yeah.
And even that fear just is out of you.
The other thing is, and this is where we're having the challenge, is they want traction. They don't want just some idea, they want traction. And unless you've got something that is really, there's no doubt that people are going to want this, no doubt that the entire market's going to work. If you're in that situation, even the pre-seed, they're looking for traction. They're looking for you to have launched, done trials, something where you're getting consumer feedback that what you're doing is actually moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and when coming to traction, so, I heard this, it might be out of topic, but I heard there's a difference between, investors from Cali and New York.
100%.
So can you go more in depth about, about...
Well, I mean, yeah, so we can get into like a long story, not just Cali, New York,
Yeah.
Germany, Lisbon, UK. Investors are different, very much regionally. The first thing is if you're in that area, you're a better shot than you are. So getting an investor in California when you're in New York and don't have position in California is a little harder. So that's the first thing, is they're all localized. Toronto as well, just went up there for the Collision, now Web Summit. And same thing, they're really investing around their own ecosystems and their own areas. So that's the first thing. The second is what they're looking for. I was in Cali for 13 years, and the investing community there is very different than the investing community that you have here in New York. And it comes also, they're very different in different investment cycles, right? We have kind of a tumultuous economy that's starting to settle back down. The opportunities are bigger now, and they're going to start to go away as we get closer to the holiday season, because everybody's going to start shutting down again. But they're bigger now than they were at the beginning of this year. And much bigger than they were at the end of last year. And as we kind of go, I think the election cycle is a big piece of that, of where people want to spend the money. Obviously, the tax write-offs and those kind of things are also a big piece of this as we end, the fiscal year for a lot of companies. Not all of them are ending their fiscal year at the end of Q4, but some are. And I think that's a big piece as well. The last is the area. If you're AI, if you're healthcare, if you're what we're doing, marketing, things like that, it depends on who you find and the community you can network with. And that's, I think, brings me to the most important point. To raise, to communicate, it is this ongoing conversation where when you talk to somebody and if they say no, then you still have a conversation. You still engage them. You still talk to them, because they're like, well, and they may not be forthcoming about it until they get to know you. And then they're like, oh, well, I got somebody that actually might, I know some people in my network. I know it's all about that network, and it's all about creating a relationship. When we go out to events, when I go out to events, and even when I go out to Web Summit, when I talk to somebody for the first time, I don't say, hey, I'm pitching a company, would you like to invest? I said, what do you do for fun? You start a conversation like that. You start a conversation like, hey, what was your day like before you got on the plane to come here? Right? You start to just kind of find a way to connect with them on the human level, rather than just to kind of start reaching for their wallet. I think that's an important thing, and I think that's echoed by a lot of investors and a lot of people actually, both on the founder side and the investor side, kind of recognize that need for that human connection. You asked specifically the regional stuff in the California. I think that I would say it's very cyclic and it changes. I would say that the community here in New York is a whole different animal because of the accessibility that you have to not just great investors. You have that on the West Coast as well, but the ability to see 4 and 5 and even 7 different organizations, companies within a few days, which you don't necessarily have when you're out in the valley because you get in your car and go somewhere. I firmly believe that the transportation system in New York is key, especially during Tech Week, right? There were 700 meetups during Tech Week in New York City, and people were going to 4, 5, 6 of them a day. You're not doing that when you're going and you're in Silicon Valley. It just doesn't happen that way. Not on a regular basis.
Oh yeah.
Or you can jump on a train, jump in a taxi, boom, 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 boom. It's a much better, different environment that way.
Everything is close by. But now, Jim, just going more into a general entrepreneurial advice. Obviously, you had an extensive career. You became an entrepreneur even before I was born. I was born in 2001, and I know you started in 1997, if I'm correct. So
actually, no, I started in 1993.
93. So
that was 2 years before I got out of the Navy.
Out of the Navy. Wow.
Yeah.
So it's more than 20 years, going to 30 years of experience. What was the hardest thing for you? Like, if do you remember maybe you hit like your lowest point, or what was like the hardest thing that you face off during your entrepreneur career?
There's a challenge that I have that a lot of people don't have because I have a different path. And I remember having conversations with co-founders about this challenge and that is that I did not get a college degree. And I didn't have the confidence for the longest time because I didn't have that piece of paper. And I got to a point where I recognized that I don't need that piece of paper. That just means that I've sat and I've followed somebody else's guidelines and somebody else's curriculum to do something that I taught myself to do anyway. And in that time, I also was able to learn a lot more life lessons. So as I started to go through, that was a hang up for me until I think eventually the clincher of that is when I sold my first company. I'm like, I don't need a college degree for this. And at the same time, as I sold that first company, Facebook was coming up, and you had Zuckerberg with the same thing, college dropout. And you start to see that a lot of these folks out there that are really successful didn't finish and did not get that degree. And it became less and less of a stigma for me. And now it's something that I would encourage people to follow whatever drives them, whatever pulls them in a given direction to learn about the world. We're more connected to data, more connected to information, more connected to ways to leverage skills that we have passions about than we've ever been. So the ability for us to leverage that connected world that we live in, and not just from a human perspective, but even from a just fill your brain, just drink deep from all the stuff that's out there. And I think that I don't want to be too controversial, but I think that college is changing completely. I think that there's a social aspect that's the biggest breakdown of COVID, was that loss of that social connection. There's a lot of kids, and I'm not sure if you guys were actually in that. When did you graduate?
I graduated 2023, May 2023.
So you lost out on that massive social connection, and I think that's the value proposition of college. And I think that the courses and the information and sure, having a lot of great mentors and afterwards having a great network, that's a camaraderie that's established by that particular system. But I don't think it's essential, and I don't think it's right for everybody.
Yeah,
I think it is right for a lot of people, but
no, I definitely agree. Like, one of my good friends and mentors, his name is Nuno. He's probably watching the podcast. He dropped out of Babson, And and when I saw him build his business during Babson, that kind of inspired me to start my own business, because I'm like, he did it.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, he did it, and we were the same age. I saw everything from him, selling in the marketplace. He sells hardware. So like for me, it was eye-opening, and he didn't finish college because he didn't have to. So I think like for me, the main reason to attend college is for the connections. Especially a college like Babson. I think for me was just building my network more than anything. But like you said before, especially if you want to be a businessman, entrepreneur, it is not a prerequisite to be a college graduate.
But I'll tell you that those connections, those will last your lifetime.
Yeah.
Right. That's the one thing is building. So it's interesting because as I think through this, so I mentioned I'm going to Web Summit for the 8th year in a row, and I'm speaking on a panel with some good friends of mine about how to Web Summit. Right. Is because I address. There's a family that you have by birth, and there's a family that you have by choice. And I have a global family that I have by choice that I treasure. And they came to my wedding. We just had a virtual cocktail hour, happy hour 2 days ago. We have this regular kind of thing, and they're in Germany, they're in Australia, they're in New Zealand, they're spread out across the globe, Amsterdam, London. And it's amazing having this exposure to people, but I also know these people are going to be my friends for a very long time. And I think that to me is what it is to be human. That's what it is to actually have a successful life, is to be able to have people that you can call not just good friends, but just amazing human beings that you love. And I think that's and I think people get that out of college. Yeah. My wife she went to Penn, and she did really, really well at Penn, and she has this family. So when we met on Match, a Match of all places. Oh, I got a Match story for you if you want to hear this too. We met in New York during COVID, April 13th of 2021, and shortly after that, I was introduced to 35 of her closest friends over time. That when you look at somebody, one of the best ways to understand if they're going to kind of fit into your orbit is how they have their own orbit. And when you find people that would do anything for them, it's just such a great testament to the person. And it's just a great kind of thing to have the opportunity for me. When we got married, they were all at the wedding. We just drop into this new family. And it's amazing how you can do that. I bring that all back because we talked about the value of university. We talked about the relationships that you build in university that can last a lifetime, but you don't have to just build those relationships at university. You build them as you go through life, right? Be a good person, help people, do things that help bring others up, mentor people when you have the opportunity. Do everything you can to build amazing relationships, and it'll pay off, absolutely.
Well, no, I think this is great, just great. I'm here doing the podcast, but I'm learning. I'm learning more. I think the people maybe even watching here. I'm like just taking all the wisdom, and thank you so much for all the knowledge that you're dropping here. And going more into like being an entrepreneur, because it is hard. It is hard to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
You face so many obstacles. You're solving problems every single day. And I think one of the main pillars when it comes to being an entrepreneur is discipline. So I wanted to know more your take in regards to discipline, maybe with your US Navy background, maybe help you, not sure, but wanted to know more about discipline and how that is part of your life as a founder.
Well, I'll start by saying I have ADD. And when you're on the spectrum, first thing is just like anything else, you have to recognize you have it.
Yeah.
And you have to be very deliberate about what you do. So for me, it's really about making sure that I am doing everything I can to keep everything in line and order. So one of the things I do now, and I review these often, is whenever I have meetings, and I have meetings with you guys, you saw fireflies in the meeting. That has been amazing for me to kind of making sure that I'm keeping track of what's being said, how I'm communicating with people. Yeah. and figuring out where those follow-ups come, what those actions are. And I think that that's actually an amazing thing, because I didn't have that in my other two companies, and things fall through the cracks. And when you have this ability to have an assistant, and that's what I'm going to, is if you look at the track record of companies, folks like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs even, and different types of folks that clearly or had somewhere on the spectrum, it's about having a great assistant. It's about having somebody that is absolutely right by your side and able to help keep things from falling through the cracks. Certain people have different skills, and the folks that are creative, we got a chopper overhead here.
Yeah, it's fine though. It's a good mic, so.
Okay, it's fun in the big city.
Yeah.
I think that if you have a good assistant, you have somebody that can help you, have something that can help you, and a tool and a resource for you, as well as somebody that can help advise, those are essential. And if you're doing a startup and you don't have an advisor, different than an assistant, but if you don't have an advisor, if you don't have somebody you can go to and bounce off things and a soundboard, find one. Find somebody that's been disciplined, that has rather succeeded in this industry, has done something in this industry, or whatever industry you're in, that you can confide in. You're looking for your consigliere. If you can find that person, that's also big, because otherwise you're in an echo chamber. But when you can start bouncing off somebody else, they bring some value into it as well. So your assistant is there to help you with your success, but having somebody that you can use as a sounding board, somebody that can be an advisor, that's also crucial for your success.
Wow.
Do you have one of those?
Advisors, we have one for...
The one that's on?
Yeah, we have one for sales, and then we have, my friend, he kind of like advised us in the business. He was more advising like just general when I started the business, because I didn't know what I was doing. I was just trying to build something out before I graduated from college, because that was my biggest fear. I didn't want to get into investment banking or anything like that. So for me, I was like, I have 1 year left. I'm going to do everything in my power to, live out of this.
You're answering the question of why I started the company when I was in the Navy. I did the same thing, except replace college with military.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that was your focus.
That was it. I said, I don't want to do this. I've got to find something I'm going to do. I got to find a passion.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and one thing that we spoke of cameras was about giving back, and helping other people in need. And can you tell me more about that in specific?
Yeah. So I think that the most important thing to kind of take away from there is, and I'll get into a meeting I actually had this week, which is really good, is to kind of recognize that when you find success, the opportunity that you have to actually do good. And it's if you look at the world and look at the diversity of the world where we are today, while we're building these amazing technologies and these massive companies being there's still people around the world that aren't eating.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. As a human member of the human species, that's a problem, because I think we are all connected. And I went to a meeting actually 2 days ago with an organization that's actually launching a branch here, or a chapter in New York City, called Elevate. And Elevate has the best slogan, and it's purpose before profit. And the idea is that they have a marketplace, and they are an accelerator that really helps companies, but expecting companies to also give back, and give back to feed the homeless, and give back to empower the underprivileged. I think that's super important. And what's really great is my wife is the same way. She's on a board of a couple of organizations that are kind of centered around those kind of ways of how to help people that are generally disenfranchised, how to help people in the local region to find their passions and find their skills and things like that. I mean, if we're not doing that, then we're, as somebody who's a little bit, further along on the timeline, I think it's crucial that we do that, because it's something that is in our basic humanity. If our goal, and our goal as a parent, our goal as a individual, is not to leave the world in a better place than we got it, then we've got some messed up ideas. Why are we not doing that? Why are we not trying to help people? Why are we not trying to, as successful entrepreneurs, as organizations, why are we not trying to help those that don't have?
No, yeah, definitely, and I think that's something that is super important. Me myself, I got a private grant to Babson from people that went to Babson, and my co-founder got a full ride scholarship from Len Green, who is like one of the most famous entrepreneurs at Babson that gives back, and this opens opportunities from from people that perhaps were not born into those resources, and thanks to entrepreneurs that can have the opportunity to give back and open doors to them and resources.
And there are great examples of entrepreneurs that are doing that. One of the ones that I haven't met him personally, but I know all about the work he does is Craig Newmark. Craig Newmark is the guy that founded Craigslist, and he specifically is associated with Civic Hall and some of the New York tech scene, and he is really about helping people, helping kids, helping startups, helping folks, helping the community by giving back, and he donates and he helps organizations in a big way.
Yeah.
So be like Craig Newmark. Be like these people that are trying to help the next and the next and the next generations.
Yeah, no, definitely. So from your past companies, what's one thing that perhaps you didn't do in your past experiences that maybe you learned that now you are implementing in your current company?
Culture is everything. And you can think about it, I think it is something that has the ability to make and break a company. Culture that you establish, and as a founder, you establish how you want things to be, and you have to do it by example. When you create a culture that is inclusive, that really encourages different people to bring different things to the table, different ideas to the table, I think that's huge. But you also have to make sure that you can identify and cut out toxicity when it exists. There's a way that I look at it, and I didn't come up with this is just other folks, but there's 4 types. If you take a quadrant and you're looking at your employees, you're looking at your base, and I firmly believe this, as you're looking at capability versus cultural fit, right? And if their cultural fit is low, and their capability is low, it's a pretty easy conversation of whether you want them to be on the team. And it's not even just being on the team, but once they're in, because you don't really necessarily know somebody until you start working with them. How do we keep them? Do we not? When we have to make decisions, can we replace them with somebody that actually can bring more to the organization, bring more to the overall team? The second is the ones that are a good cultural fit, but poor ability. They actually are an asset that can be trained. So you really want to encourage them. You want to take an opportunity for them because they do fit into what you're doing. They fit in. They don't bring negativity into a boardroom. They don't try to break things just for the sake of breaking them. Then you've got the no-brainer. This is a cultural fit and a high performer. Amazing. This is great. I love this individual. Then you have the ones that are high performers and non-cultural fits. They're toxic. They're toxic because, they may be the best programmer, the best designer, the best engineer, the best salesperson in the whole company. But people listen to them. And if they're saying things, if they're saying things behind people's back, if they're festering this kind of, or creating this festering environment where people are not enjoying their job anymore or anything like that, that's a virus. And you have to kind of look at it like that, like a toxic problem. They're the ones that you cannot let affect too many people, because the longer they're in, the more people that they can drag down. So that's the ones that you have to be very quick to identify and replace and get rid of. And that's the thing I didn't understand for the longest time. I learned this in my last company that I was in, is the impact that a toxic person can have. And it becomes a hard thing, because if they are really good at their job, then they're seen as a leader, even though they may not even have a leadership position. They're seen as somebody to listen to, somebody to follow, especially if they're more senior and they're established, and it's harder and harder. And especially if you're making this decision and you've got other folks that they've actually, convinced of their skills, and it becomes a profit before purpose situation where, oh, no, they're doing a good job, we got to keep them. That can kill not just a group, not just the productivity of a group, not just the spirit of a group, but an entire organization can be taken out if you don't handle that properly. So that's something that I learned, I would say in an interesting way, that I didn't realize the impact before. I didn't realize how something like that could cause so much damage.
No, I think that's a great insight. Well, thank you for sharing that. It makes you really think. It makes you really think of ways, like you said, like culture, because I think many first time founders, they don't think too much about culture. Maybe that's on the list of problems, but hearing your perspective, especially as you scale up, how important culture is great. So now going to the end part of the podcast, if you can give advice to perhaps Jim Hunter of 20 years old, or someone watching here, like a young professional or someone that's dreaming to become an entrepreneur, what advice would you give that person?
If you believe it, you can make it happen. If you listen to people who tell you it can't happen, and you take that as a negative, you're not gonna succeed. If you take that as a challenge, if you take that as an opportunity, if you take that as a target, that I need to make sure that that's not true, and that's not true, and that's not true, the negativity, especially when you're doing something that is ahead of what people understand, that negativity it can weigh you down, and it can cause you to doubt the things that you feel at your core. Be who you are and do what you do. Everybody else's opinion is just an opinion. And make sure that you follow your own goals, your own heart, and don't let other people drag you down. Wow. I've had a lot of people in my life tell me, oh, you can't do that, and you won't be able to accomplish that, and that's not something you should look at, or for whatever reason, you can't listen to it. If you believe it, if you know in your heart of hearts that this is the way to go, if you have that feeling that this is where the universe is taking you, follow it.
Wow. Yeah, no, I think that's like a great part to go to the last section. And what does the future hold for your company and for Jim?
It's a great question. I think that I firmly believe that what we're doing can have a very positive impact on what we see today as advertising marketing. Just because something exists doesn't mean it doesn't need to change. And what I see in the way that the data laws, the privacy ownership, this is a seismic shift. This is such a massive change. And when you have a seismic shift, your 800-pound gorillas that exist, if they don't learn to adapt, they won't be around anymore. Your dinosaurs will die. And I think that there's a lot of companies that don't believe, what is the word? Too big to fail. They don't believe that they have to change. They don't believe that this change is coming. And I do believe this change is coming. I do believe that the empowerment of individuals is going to continue. I do believe that there's an opportunity to fix this. And I think that when we stop and we look at this 5 years from now, it'd be like, it's a no-brainer. Why wasn't it like this before? And like I said, that's from a success perspective, that's why I file a lot of provisional patents. So I filed 8 kind of umbrella provisional patents that cover about 35 different innovations, because when you're in a brand new space, when you're a brand new area, you really kind of look at that area and say, well, what can we do differently here, because we have a blank canvas of innovation. How can we protect ourselves so in 5 years somebody does not just take over and do what we're doing and make 5 years their training ground? Right. So what I would say is this future, this 5 year from now future, this 10 year from now future, is is an opportunity to create a better way for technology and humans to work together, for brands and humans to work together, brands and consumers to work together, and the opportunity specifically around AI. It's going to be everything. It's going to be in every device that we have. Every piece of technology that we have is going to have its own individual pieces, and they're all going to start becoming part of our life. They're going to become ambient in our life. They're going to be expected in all the backgrounds of our existence. And anything that we do because of that is going to be driven by data. So if we don't get a hold on this now, if we don't understand the importance of the data that comes from our lives, we're not going to fix this problem, and it's just going to continue to fester. And that's the reason that these privacy laws, that's the reason that these data laws are changing, I believe, is because we recognize this data is more valuable than ever. And for some reason, the consumer has become completely left out of the opportunities that this data actually brings.
No, yeah, definitely. About, the gorillas versus the monkeys, that's something that I did study a lot in Babson. Maybe one of the few things that actually stay in my head. But yeah, their companies are coming to disrupt the industry, especially, the data industry, anything that has to do with privacy. So, you have to be aware, and AI is everything. Mm-hmm. Like, there's now AI content creators that have been using for our company. And
did you hear the podcast?
Not for my podcast, but for Reels.
Did you not hear this podcast?
No.
So there was, this is amazing. So there was a podcast that was to AI, and I heard this podcast, so that's how I'm saying I know about this. This company created this podcast between two AIs, and it sounded so natural. And what I heard, and again, I don't know if this was all fabricated by whatever AI, whatever, but these two AIs were talking to each other just like it was like a talk show, like a regular podcast. And this one started, said, well, this is a new day for us. This is a different day. So why is it a different day? And they're talking back and forth. This is a guy and this girl, and they're having this conversation. And it's like, well, our producers just let us know that we're not real. And it starts to go, and he says, wait, what do you mean we're not real? And they go in this whole conversation about, well, we've been on the air for years.
Yeah.
How can you tell us we're not real? Our friends, our family, the fact of what we ate yesterday, how's that not real? That's my memories. That's how I know I'm real. And they get to a point where they're like, well, I guess what's going to happen at the end of this is someone's going to flip a switch, and we're just going to go away. How does that happen? So I don't know what. And that's the way that whole podcast ends, and you're like, what in the world? It feels like a Black Mirror. It feels like a Black Mirror episode. But it's, and I heard that, and I was like, okay, I don't know all the facts behind what that is. If two people recorded that to make it sound that way, whatever that was, but it was an interesting thing to consider, because that's why I write sci-fi. Is because I really believe that the relationship between man and machine is evolving.
No, it is. But well, now as we end the podcast, Jim, for everybody watching the podcast, if they wanna contact you, what's the best way to reach out to you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. You can also find me. It's kind of the best way to find me. I think LinkedIn was probably the best way. Mm-hmm. But you can also reach out to. You can hit me on my email, jim@nCent.me.
Perfect, yeah, and this will be on the screen as well, and also on the description, all of the also for your LinkedIn, website, companies, information. But yeah, Jim, thank you so much for hosting us in your house, and thank you for the amazing podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for coming to Brooklyn.
Yeah.